So welcome to our Tuesday at 10 call for today. And I want to start out just by giving some updates on NAR and IAR and MIBOR. Biggest update that I have for you, I think, is Lawrence Lund, who's the National Association of Realtors economist. He has said he has come out and said that 6% is going to be the new normal for interest rates, and that he does not expect to see a return to 3, 4, or 5%, but that 6% is the new normal for interest rates. So if you've got people out there that are sitting in the wings hoping to get a 3, 4, or 5% interest rate before they buy a home, that's probably not ever going to happen. Well, I never say never, but it's not going to happen in the near future. It looks like for 2025 that interest rate's probably going to be around 6%. So he does also think that the real estate market will pick up in 2025, that it'll be a good market for us. But again, he's saying 6% is probably going to be the new normal. I also want to talk about this whole thing of buyer agency contracts that we now are required to have buyers sign. And also, I want to relate this to the seller side of the transaction. We can't do business as usual. The settlement changed the landscape for how we do real estate. And if you try to do real estate like you've always done it in the past, you're going to find it, number one, it's going to be difficult to do it that way. And number two, you're going to find out that it gets you in trouble. So it's important to understand that we have a new way of doing real estate. And that new way of doing real estate is that by and large, commissions are negotiated in the purchase agreement. Now that can be pretty awkward at times, and it is something new. Now, that said, most sellers are willing to compensate the buyer broker. So most sellers are willing to do that currently. That could change in the future. But right now, most sellers are perfectly willing to compensate the buyer broker. But how much that compensation is going to be and what they're going to do is kind of up in air. Now, the way that we currently, the forms that we currently have through the Indiana Association of Realtors, which are for use by realtors in the state of Indiana, and which we use, it does not give an option on there of negotiable. It has a set amount. So when you're doing a buyer broker agreement, you have to have a set amount that you will work for between buyer and between you and the buyer. Or in this case, it's just like a listing agreement. You're representing this brokerage, and so it's between this brokerage and your buyer. But you have to put a number down. You can't just put negotiable or leave it blank. You have to put a number in there. So whatever that number is, 3%, 2.5%, whatever, you've got to put a number in there. Okay? Because that's how the form's designed, and that's what they're telling us how you have to use it. You can't put negotiable in there. Listing agreement, same thing. You have a spot where you ask you put your commission, so you put whatever it is you're going to charge, and then you put what you're going to negotiate with the buyer broker, and what amount. And again, it's an amount. It's not negotiable. It's an amount that has to go in there. And so let's say the seller says, well, I'll pay 2.5% to the buyer broker. Okay.
At a particular price, like 500,000 offer.
It doesn't matter. They're gonna that's completely negotiable. The amount that they offer to the buyer broker is completely negotiable, and the buyer or the seller can pay whatever they want, including nothing.
So if the seller says I will pay anything 400, I would pay 2%, like 495.
Well, here's ramifications of this whole thing.
Okay.
Okay. So say that you agree with, so say that you're the seller, you're seller's agent, okay? And so you've written the agreement, and the seller agreed to pay 2.5% commission. Okay. Now, buyer broker has negotiated 3% commission. Okay. And so buyer broker submits an offer with 3% commission and the addendum. So now what does the seller do? The seller's only agreed to pay 2.5%. Okay, so does the seller now counter that 2.5%, because that's what they agreed to pay, or do they accept the 3%? Now let me tell you the ramifications of each. Okay, if they accept 3%, then you have to amend the listing contract to 3%. If they go back with 2.5%, they counter the commission 2.5%, then the buyer's agent has to amend the buyer agent agreement, or the buyer has to pay that extra 0.5%. So you see kind of the quagmire we're in here. So you have to think through that. And what that means is you have to have these discussions with your buyers and your sellers ahead of time, so that they are prepared for what might happen. Okay. So a buyer, if you have a buyer and you're meeting with your buyer agent or your buyer, and you do the buyer agency agreement, you have to explain that agreement to them. So let's say that you've agreed to work for 3%. And so your agreement's for 3%. You need to discuss with them that we will make our offer contingent upon 3%. However, the seller may counter that. They may counter it for less. But we have a contract between you and I for 3%. So my question is, if we get a counter offer for less than the commission, will you make up the difference?
Most people will say no. Okay.
Okay. If they say no,
then you have to amend.
No, okay, then that means you're going to have to then let them know that you're willing to work for less than. Okay. So if you wrote an agreement for 3, and then you have that discussion with them, and they say, no, I'm not going to make up the difference. Then the question to them is, well, then what are you asking for me to lower my commission? And if they say, yes, that's what I would ask you to do, because I'm not going to pay any, then what you want to do is you want to let them know, okay, if we run into that circumstance, then we will need to amend this agreement. I will work for 2.5% if I have to. And that means we will amend this at that time. So that way they're prepared ahead of time for that. And you're prepared ahead of time. Now, the same thing applies to a seller. So you're having a conversation with your seller and you're asking them, do you want to compensate the buyer broker? And they say, yes, I'm willing to compensate the buyer broker. And so you're filling out the contract and you say, okay, how much are you willing to do the buyer broker? And they say, okay, I'm willing to do 2.5%. Okay. So you put 2.5% in your purchase or in your listing contract. Then you have this conversation with them. Okay, you've offered to pay 2.5%. Understand that we may receive a purchase offer that says 3% or 3.5%. Who knows? Because buyer brokers have different fees. And so we may receive a purchase agreement from a buyer who wants us to pay the buyer broker 3% or 3.5%. Now, in that case, are you willing to go to one of those higher numbers? Now,
The seller might say depend on the offer. I mean, if
well, yeah,
asking for it.
exactly. Chances are they're going to say, well, it depends on the offer. Okay. Say, okay, I understand that. So we're looking at the net to you. So that's good. So if that comes up, and if it's a good offer and you decide, yeah, I'll pay 3%, then we will need to amend our listing contract to allow 3% compensation to the buyer broker, so that they have an understanding that if they agree to a purchase offer of that, then we need to amend the listing contract to match the commission that we're paying.
Jim,
Okay?
but what about if the buyer, if get a low offer, they are considering it, and they say no offer, I'm not going to pay 2.5, I will pay 2% or 1.5. That's too low for
Okay.
an offer. We might consider.
If it's anything other than what they've agreed to in the purchase in the listing contract, then the listing contract would need to be amended.
Okay.
Okay.
At that
'Cause
point, you
listing
will tell.
contract and you have a purchase agreement, the listing contract, see, it used to specify what we would advertise. We can't advertise it anymore. But they can state that they'll do that. Just let them know that if in the negotiations things change, that we may need to amend this listing agreement, so that they understand that in negotiating these things, we may need to do an amendment, so that they understand ahead of time the possible scenarios that they may have. And so they understand ahead of time that they may need to amend an agreement.
So when you counter offer and say this is the purchase price we agree, and the commission will be 2%. At that point, if they accept it, I amend the listing agreement, or do I amend?
Yes, you amend it then. Yes.
Okay.
You want to amend it in advance, but okay, so you just need to have those discussions with people, and you need to have that discussion with your buyers of, hey, I will do everything in my power to get the commission paid, but if the seller's not willing to pay the full commission, are you willing to make up the difference? You need to know that up front, because otherwise, when you get to that point, let's say you get a counter at 2.5% and they're on the hook for 3%, and you go back to them and say, okay, you're going to have to make up the difference on this. They're going to go, what are you talking about? Okay, so you need to have explained this in advance so that they don't do that, so that you have a complete understanding. So very important that you have a conversation with your sellers about and your buyers about how the negotiation process works and how commissions work on both sides. Otherwise, they're going to be totally confused when they get into the whole commission thing. So don't try to shortcut that by thinking, well, it's business as usual. We just can't advertise commissions. It's not business as usual. It's It's different. It's a different world now. And we need to retrain buyers and sellers to understand the difference. Because most buyers and sellers don't understand. This is new for them. They've not been in the industry. That you know, sometimes this is the first time they're ever buying a house. They don't know what it's supposed to be. And so you have to educate them on that. So all the more reason why you should have a buyer consultation with every single buyer. Now, keep in mind, a buyer consultation can be a Zoom meeting. It could be just a telephone meeting. Telephone meeting isn't the best because you can't show things. Whereas if you're doing a Zoom or in person, uh, then you have a little bit better rapport with your buyer. So highly recommend those. So any questions on that? Okay, next thing I want to talk about is we have your office here is available for you to use. I do not use this office on a regular basis myself. I've set the office up as a conference room, and it is reservable just like any of the other conference rooms and any of the Jaeger properties. So, and there are Jaeger properties in Noblesville and Greenwood and Plainfield and out at Fort Bend. They're all over the city. So if you're having a buyer broker buyer consultation, you can meet in any of those locations and reserve those conference rooms. So I just want to remind you of that I can reserve those for you, and it's at no cost to you. The office you can use, it's set up for buyer consultation. You could even use the office for a mobile closing. So if you're working with, for instance, what's that title company we had? Not Centurion, but dang, their name escapes me. At any rate, they do mobile closings. So if you
Voy a
got
regresar a Menarzo, José. ¿Te
who?
ocupa algo más?
I don't know. But if anybody doing a mobile closing, they could use our office. Okay, for the closing. So it's a conference table. So you just schedule it in here. Now, I've made some amenities to the office that I'm going to show you. Okay, so now in the office, we do have a mini fridge. Hopefully you can see it there, right down there. There it is. and on top of the mini fridge, we have snacks. So there's potato chips and cookies, and there's some candy in there from Halloween. There are things there that you can give your clients, or if they come in, they have kids. You know, kids always like a snack. In the refrigerator, I keep it stocked with water, Diet Cokes, and Sprites, and so there are drinks in there for that you can offer to your buyers that you're meeting with. So this is provided as an amenity to you, and so don't hesitate to use it. It's available for you at no additional cost, and so I would encourage you to use it. You're not kicking me out of the office to use it. I'm not here most of the time. And if you reserve the office, I'll make sure I'm not here when you have it reserved. So, but you do need to let me know because other agents do use the office, and so I want to make sure that we were not double booking the office. So if the office isn't available, there are other conference rooms here that are available. We have the second floor conference room. And we've got the first floor conference room.
What time do they, until what time is it available? I mean, like, what time do they close?
They're available anytime.
I know, but like can you go there in the evening?
Yes, you can use them in the evening. The building's open until I think about 7 o'clock at night, something like that. After that, you need a fob to get in the building. So if you had a late meeting, let me know. I could come by and open the door for you. But otherwise, during business hours, that the building's open, and anytime the building's open, then you have access to the conference rooms and the office.
So you're talking about 6 o'clock in the afternoon? 6?
I think it's 6 or 7 that
Six,
the
okay.
building closes. I think it's actually 7 o'clock
Okay.
that the doors lock. You can still get in the building with a fob, and some of you have a fob, so you just use the fob and walk right in. Okay. If you're going to use the office on a regular basis after hours, I would let me know and I'll get a fob for you. It costs $10, I think, for a fob, and then you can get in the door. Okay. All right. So that's the news from Realty World Indy. And so any questions on anything? This is question and answer time, and then we're going to jump on to a different subject. But do you have any questions that you need to get answered?
I have a general real estate, I guess, courtesy, or I don't know about ethics, but I have a buyer who's buying a house down in Southport area, and it was contingent on selling a house in Texas. And the house in Texas was having some problems. The buyer's agent down there wasn't responding to the listing agent, so we were kind of up in the air as to whether anything was wrong. So my buyer had asked me to fill out the sellers of the house I'm buying, which are also the owners. It's a flip property. If something happened with that, if he'd be able to lease it from them for a few months while he tried to resell the property, just he's trying to prepare for the worst.
Yeah.
So the agents of the house that he is buying, the agent that I'm working with, the listing agent, contacted the agent in Texas, the listing agent in Texas, to basically vet out the situation himself without telling me he was going to do that, without getting the contact information. He just found it on his own based on the address. I found that to be a little off-putting that he would do that.
Yeah.
And now I will say he ended up getting a lot of good information from my guy's agent. Just the timing worked out that the other agent had responded the same time my guy. So it worked out, but I did not appreciate that. What's your take on that in general? Should an agent contact the listing agent of a contingency sold home?
No.
Okay. So
they're not a party to that transaction.
Yeah. So
now a case could be made by that agent. Well, yes, I am a party to that transaction because it's my transaction is contingent on that transaction.
Right.
Yeah.
So in a court of law, it would depend on the judge and or jury whether they would agree with that. Okay. So, the best thing is, while you may not appreciate it, you have to, we just had a situation with one of our agents where a seller contacted the buyer direct. And
that's more understandable because they don't understand
they don't understand. And is that ethical? Well, first of all, they're not a realtor. The buyer's not a realtor, or seller isn't a realtor. So they contacted direct, not through their agent, direct. Okay. But then the agent got involved, and the agent talked to the buyer direct. So not a good situation. So, but the best thing to do in all of those kind of situations is, hey, how would you want it handled if you were in that situation? And try to be, try to understand the other party side, just like what Lisa and I were talking about earlier. If you have an agent that clearly made a mistake, you could take advantage of that mistake or not. And you're not necessarily, if it's clearly a mistake, you're not necessarily doing wrong by your buyer or seller if you take advantage of that, or if you point that out to the person, if it's clearly a mistake. Again, how would you want to be treated?
Yeah, I mean,
made a mistake, would you want the other party to be forgiving?
Yeah, and I'm not going to make a big deal of it. What would have caused a problem is if if that other agent would have said something that jeopardized my guy's purchase here and
Yeah.
made the seller, you know, like that put that other agent in a really bad spot because she's also supposed to be serving her guy. She shouldn't be
Oh,
talking to this other agent on the house he's buying. So,
yeah, yeah. Well, and that can always be something like, hey, you're not a party to this transaction. I really can't talk to you about this transaction other than to say, yes, we have some issues, but we feel like we're going to get them resolved. In other words, you can't talk about specifics without violating confidential information. So you do want to be careful in that kind of situation where you don't compromise um, the information that's going in and out. So just be careful out there and try to treat people the right way, but also protect yourself. Document everything. Document everything. So um, if you have a buyer that's not communicating or a seller that's not communicating with you, make sure that you use all three methods to get a hold of them. Call them, text them, email them, so that you've demonstrated if things blow up in the future, you've demonstrated, hey, I've tried every way that I could, you know, short of going to this person's house and knocking on their door to communicate with them, and they have failed to communicate back. So you've covered yourself. Also, when you have a verbal conversation over a telephone call, make sure you document what happened on the phone call, put those notes somewhere. And also, what I would do is send an email to the person I had the verbal conversation with, summarizing the conversation. And that way, then they've got it, I've got it, it's in writing. Can't be disputed then later on because the time to dispute it would have been right then when I sent the email saying this is what we talked about. So later on, they can't say, well, I never said that. So yeah, it's important to keep yourself safe. It's important to cover those kind of things uh, in a timely fashion. And I know we all have it where we get buyers or sellers that are they're just awful to work with, and sometimes we wish that we didn't have them as a client. Uh, and, uh, and sometimes there are times where we just fire clients. However, once we get into an agreement once we have a contract, then the contract is king. And whenever whether it's a buyer or seller, doesn't matter who, but if somebody wants to try to get out of the contract or breach the contract, you can no longer advise them. Okay, if they're determined to breach the contract, what you want to do is you want to tell them you need to talk to your attorney. So if you're going to breach the contract, talk to your attorney. I'm not licensed to practice law, cannot advise you.
I have a question.
Yes.
If I have a client, I have a listing that's gonna come up this weekend, and my client wants to put the price, it's too high. He put it with some other realtor. The listing expire after 6 months. He wants me to put it the same price. I told him the price is too high. We're gonna put it there. We're gonna lower it. But then I told him that if I don't sell it in 6 months at the price that he wants, I'm gonna charge him $400 to pay the pictures and for paying for the posting of the sign. Can I do that or no?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
$400 later.
You're talking about a retainer type thing where they pay,
Yes.
and that's in your purchase agreement. You can put that in there that they pay that.
Okay.
So, or not your purchase agreement, or your listing contract. But I would be cautious about taking an overpriced listing. I mean, if it's overpriced and they know it's overpriced, it's probably not going to sell. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is crazy. You're crazy if you do
And
the
that-
same thing over and over again and you think you're going to get a different result.
And then my client is like, well, I just put it on the market and it did not sell for 6 months and I didn't have to pay anything to my other realtor. Did the laws change or what happened?
Yeah,
Oh my God, that's something in my brokerage that I have to do.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I blame it
So-
on you, Mr. Jim. I blame it on you.
yeah, yeah. Well, you can do that. You can blame it on your broker. Yeah. So, uh, but yeah, the main thing is, make sure that you get everything in writing, and when you have a contract and they're in breach, now you can suggest, you could tell if someone's in breach of contract. Okay, so they've failed to deliver earnest money, they failed to do something in the contract, and so they're now in breach of contract. You advise them they need to talk to an attorney. You can say, now there is an option that I can do for you, and that is we could ask for a mutual release from the purchase agreement. If we ask for a mutual release, understand that the other party does not have to release us from the purchase agreement. So just because I send in a mutual release to them does not mean they have to accept it. And it does not mean they have to give you your earnest money back. You're in breach of contract. So understand that you need to talk to an attorney because you're in breach of contract. I can do a mutual release, ask for one, but that's all it is. It's an ask. It's a request. They do not have to fulfill that request. And they cannot go out and buy another house while they're still under contract. So if there's been no mutual release from the contract, then they're still obligated to the contract. And that's buyer and seller. So if the seller's wanting a mutual release and a buyer doesn't release them, they cannot put their house back on the market and try to sell it. They're already under contract with a buyer. And so buyers and sellers are under contract with each other. And on inspections, understand it's very clear in the language in the purchase agreement for inspections. If one party does not respond by the deadline, then the response is deemed accepted. So if the buyer does not submit within the required time, then they bought the house as is. Same thing with the seller. If a seller fails to respond to an inspection response in a timely fashion, then they've agreed to whatever that inspection response was. So no response is a response in dealing with inspection. So, and we have to make that clear for them because they may not understand that. They may think it's like an offer where we make an offer and then if nobody responds, then we could make another offer. That's not how it works with inspection responses. If you make a response and the other party doesn't respond, then they've accepted that response. So it's real important to make sure that buyers and sellers understand those parts of the contract. And as we discussed last week, one of the things that I do is try to prepare them for, because a lot of contention comes up over inspections. They go through, they were expecting a perfect house and the inspector has this whole long list of things that are wrong with the house. Okay. Maybe only with a couple of things might be major. So if you have that conversation with a buyer ahead of time, when you're doing your buyer consultation and you talk about the purchase agreement, you talk about a home inspection and how a home inspection works and what they can ask for in a home inspection, et cetera, then you won't have that many problems with dealing with your inspections because you've already talked about it up front. And that's where you have that conversation with them to let them know, hey, old is not defective. So when you're looking through a house, for instance, and you look in the furnace room and man, that furnace is obviously original. Okay. One of your responsibilities as a buyer's agent is to point that out to them. Hey, that looks like an original furnace. And understand when the house is inspected, if our inspector says, hey, that furnace is nearing the end of its useful life, we will not be able to get the seller to replace that. So we either buy the house knowing that it's an old furnace, or we could write in the purchase agreement. We could make it part of the purchase agreement that the seller agrees to replace the furnace with a new furnace. So we could do that. But we can't do it at the inspection time because we know that the furnace is old. Now, on the other side of the coin, if our inspector inspects that furnace and it's got a cracked heat exchanger and it's defective, then we can require that the seller repair the furnace or replace. If it can be repaired, then they can repair it. If it can't be, then they have to replace it. So just let them know how it works, how real estate works. Otherwise, it can get you in trouble. and I see most of the inspection. Almost all the mutual releases that I see are due to inspection issues, and it's due to an expectation typically of the buyer on the condition of the property. And so as a buyer's agent, you need to advise them properly. And keep in mind, you got a first-time home buyer. They're buying the cheapest properties they can get their hands on, right? You know there's going to be inspection issues. You know there are. So be right up front with them. Hey, you know, in the price range that we're trying to buy, there's going to be inspection issues. So we need to be prepared that, hey, there may be inspection issues that we have to deal with. And so let's talk about that right up front. You know, and again, if you went through a house with them, you showed them a house, they want to write an offer on that house, and that house looks like it's in pretty sad shape, you might want to talk about the inspection responses ahead of time, so you don't get in trouble. Wow, we're out of time. We had lots of stuff to talk about. I was going to talk about a new feature in core in our Bold Trail, which used to be KB Core, is now Bold Trail. Well, Bold Trail has a new thing called Present, and it's part of your marketing, but it does kind of a cool thing for you. And if you need to go, I understand you need to go, but I'm going to take a little extra time to show this to you. It's not complicated. In fact, it's very easy, but I do want to share my desktop with you, and I want to show this to you because it's pretty cool. Okay, so first of all, this is your Bold Trail platform. You find this down here under marketing. So if you click on the marketing tab on your side here, it's going to pull up all your marketing options here. Well, I clicked on something else. Okay, it pulls up this marketing. It pulls up listing machine and etc. Well, one of the things that you have available to you is a thing called Present. And so if you hit get started right here, it's going to pull up presentations that you can use, and it's got a buyer presentation and a listing presentation, and these might be excellent presentations to use as a pre-listing or pre-buyer consultation.
How did you get to that?
Huh?
How did you get to that? I was looking and I got lost.
I chose marketing, the marketing tab down the side.
Okay.
And so you have presentations here. I have seller presentation, buyer presentation, and then I've got win the representation, buyer tour, win the offer. The one I want to talk about is the buyer presentation right now, but there's also a seller presentation that you can do. At any rate, you just hit the start button and it allows you to edit this, or you can use it just as it is. And let me show you, and the cool thing is, okay, so you go in and you pull up the presentation, then you can easily email it to anybody in your database, or even to multiple people in your database. But so if you've got your client in your database, you can easily send this to them. And let me show you what they get. That's what the cool part of this is what they get. So this is the email that they get from you if it's a buyer thing. And you, by the way, you're going to write this email. Hi, Jim Test, a buyer's agent, representation presentation available for you to view. Jim, it will be my pleasure to serve you as you search for your new home. My goal is to make this an efficient and trouble-free process. Here is some information about how I will be assisting you. Once we meet in person or via Zoom, I will have additional information and documents to share with you. I look forward to working with you, Jim. And for the best experience, please view the presentation on a computer using this link. Okay, so I can go in here and click on this link, and it will pull up the presentation for me. Now, because I have Core Present open, it's going to pull up the editable. Oh, it didn't. Okay, so here's my presentation. So it's prepared for them, and they can just click through it. Why am I the right buyer's agent? Okay, I have local market knowledge, I have experience and expertise, client-centered approach, strong negotiation skills. I coordinate with professionals, facilitating communication, protecting your interests. Okay, so they've got some information here. And purpose and importance of a buyer's agent. And again, it goes through why a buyer's agent is important for you to use. And so it's got that information. And then it's got a nice thank you at the end, and they can click on let's get started. And that will then send a message to you that they're ready to get started. Now, one of the cool things about this is that when you do that, you also get an email as the sender, okay, that says Jim Test has viewed a presentation in Present. And it tells you what they viewed, and you can click here to see the time spent and engagement details and et cetera. So you get an email saying that they actually looked at that. So one way that this could be used pretty effectively would be when you get a new buyer, somebody says, hey, can you help me find a home? Yeah, I'd be glad to find a home. Let's get together and let me consult with you. So you schedule a buyer consultation with them to meet at a future time. You can go back and immediately send them this presentation in preparation for your actual buyer consultation. So it gets something in their hands immediately that is available. And again, it's right here in the marketing tab of your Bold Trail, which used to be KB Core. It's now called Bold Trail. It's just a rebranding of the same thing, but they have added some new things. And so it's great that they've added these new things, and you should take advantage of them. I'm providing these to you at my expense. And so if you use these things, it will get you more business, I think. So at any rate, hopefully that's useful. If you have more questions on that, because we're so limited on time, if you have more questions on that, I'd be glad to cover that with you one-on-one and walk you through how to use that. It's very easy to use, very user-friendly. And again, it's something immediately that you can send right out, right away to some new person that you're working with. And so they have something to prepare them for your buyer consultation that kind of sells you in advance. So hope that's helpful to you. Any last questions before I end the meeting? I am recording this, so I will send a recording out to you. But any questions? No
Thank you.
questions? Okay, great. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim.